From under the Golden Dome in Charleston, this is the West Virginia Capitol Report.
Hi, welcome to the State Capitol, where we are filming the Capitol Report. I'm Allison Taylor. I'm a Fayette County Commissioner. I'm here with West Virginia's State Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Welcome, and thank you for coming. We want to discuss, we have a lot going on at the state level in your office, and I've been dying to get you here so we can figure out, let everybody know about these successes. One of the things I wanted to start with was, going back just a little bit, was the opioid settlement lawsuit. I know all the counties as commissioners, we had to sign and accept the settlement, and I know Fayette County did. And I wanted to ask you to explain not only some background about the lawsuit, but what it means for the counties and the state.
Absolutely. Well, this is really an incredible agreement between the state of West Virginia and the political subdivision. So all the counties and the cities have signed on board. Virtually all. There may be a couple that are still outstanding. In fact, if you're one of those, please sign up very quickly, because otherwise, if you don't sign up, you don't get any resources whatsoever. You don't get to participate. I know everyone wants to be part of it, but we started with the proposition that everyone in the state needed to be on the same page. West Virginia was the hardest hit state in the country, and I've been saying no to these national settlements that really didn't treat West Virginia properly. They'd set up this formula primarily based on population, and as many people know, my office has really led the way on a lot of the litigation against the drug makers, the wholesalers, and the pharmacies. And we've had success because we've rejected the national settlements and focused on just what happened in West Virginia. And obviously many people know there was a huge proliferation of pills all around our state. And so we focused litigation on the culpability of the entities that were suing, giving very specific information about what they did, either through misrepresentations or failure to conform with the duty on the state level or on the federal level. And that's why I think we had some success. So at the beginning of the process, though, I first sat down with all the political subdivisions, and we thought we'd be better able to reach an agreement if we spoke with one voice. So we reached an agreement whereby the money would be distributed 24.5% to all the counties and to the cities, 72.5% to a foundation structure where all the cities and counties are going to benefit from that, and then 3%, just 3% is held back for the state in case of future litigation, because we want to be prudent in case there's some issues that arise down the line. So with that agreement, political subdivisions took this back to the local counties and to the cities, and virtually everyone approved it. And the value of that is you get to have the synergies to work together within the regions and the state to do things that are going to be of tremendous benefit to the citizens of the state. Attacking the problem holistically from a supply, a demand, and an educational perspective. And so there will be 6 regions across West Virginia, really built on the mental health regions that have been in place for a long, long time. That's the reason why we did that, is because there are service providers that are common to each of those regions, and we wanted to make sure that we're doing this from a rational perspective. So we have the 6 regions. The foundation will be managed by an 11-person board. 6 of those will be representatives from the counties and the regions, and then 5 will be picks from the governor. And then there'll be an executive director. And I think the value of all this is that everyone around the state is going to have a lot of input in terms of how all these dollars are getting expended. That's a huge plus for West Virginia. We also work closely with the governor's office, Governor Justice, who had a plan in place, but they never had the resources to fund it. So we thought, combine the good work that they've done, the work that others have done, and now establish this foundation. So we're literally right now in the process of beginning to set that up. First, we had to get the approval of all of the political subdivisions, so that was the delay. Then, of course, we're asking all of the subdivisions to approve the settlements that we brought in, and I think it's been widely reported that we brought in close to $300 million of settlements, and that's a real positive as well, because this represents double the national average. West Virginia is #1 per capita in the country by a country mile in these settlements. So I did my best to try to really put West Virginia first. And people can always complain and say, well, you may not, you should have gotten better, right? You should have done more. Well, our deal is really, really good. When you're number one in the country by a lot,
Right.
you know, and you avoid some of the risk. We actually settled some of those cases in the middle of the trial and won the last day of the trial because we wanted to avoid an adverse result.
Right.
And that was critical too. But I think that this is really going to be very positive. The money is going to be spent in a really targeted manner over a prolonged period of time because this is going to be able to take in private sector donations. It's going to take in some governmental resources, take in the settlement money, and I think it's really going to be effective because it also will have a needs assessment all across West Virginia before any funds are dispersed, which I think is pretty cool. That way you don't actually duplicate what's going on.
Oh, it's true. We're all about studies at the County Commission in Fayette. We want to know where we're spending our money and why. I think that needs assessment is important. I think you'll find, and you touched upon it, that mental health is a big part of it. As you know, I practice abuse and neglect law
Sure.
and defend criminal clients who have, and I'd say 98% of our cases are related to the drug problem. But I would say of those, almost all of them have an underlying mental health component to it.
Right. Well, and West Virginia has been unique because while it was ravaged by the pills, then people went on from there and got hooked to a lot of the other illicit drugs that
Right.
are out there. We're seeing a lot, I'm sure you're seeing in Fayette, a lot of fentanyl, and much of that product actually gets sourced. Originally, some of the base ingredients from China, they go to the Mexican drug cartels,
Right.
then finished product comes up through the border, makes its way into Raleigh County, to Fayette County, to Kanawha, across the board. And so I know I look at this as a way to help plug some of the holes because we just haven't had the resources to address it. And obviously money is only one piece of the equation to push back, but it does help to be able to fund some of the education, the prevention, and obviously some of the law enforcement needs as well. I bet I could look at what's going on in Fayette County, and we know you guys have been hurting badly over the regional jail fees.
Right.
This settlement is going to help Fayette County and all across West Virginia. Regional jail fee bills will be better able to be paid. That's a big plus. Or someone might be able to obtain more law enforcement support. That's terrific as well.
That's been another issue. In fact, I had a conversation this morning with the Raleigh County Commissioner about its sheriff approached the commission about getting the starting salaries raised about $10,000 a year per deputy. Our sheriff approached me about that just about 3 days ago. So it's still, even though we just gave them a raise,
Sure.
it's still an issue. We're having trouble recruiting and retaining law
Right.
enforcement, in large part because of the attitude toward police, but also we're just not paying them well enough. They can't afford to live. They have to work so much overtime
Right.
and have side jobs, and they'll work in the municipalities and in the county. So that's going to help a lot, I think, in those kind
Absolutely.
of terms.
Well, we have to treat the men and women in blue the right way. I
Right.
mean, you have to take care of the folks that are taking care of you, and whether you're talking about police officers and firemen and first responders, we have to do this the right way. But I am hopeful that this is going to help from a law enforcement perspective. I made sure that when the money decisions were made in terms of how we set up the structure, that we were looking out to the counties, we were looking to make sure that law enforcement was an eligible part of it, and it is. And I think that's going to be positive. And obviously there's going to be a lot of focus on treatment to try to target the resources to those who need it most. And that'll apply at the beginning stages, the detoxing, all the way up through the replacement of people into the workforce, which is very, very important. We have a workforce shortage right now here in West Virginia. We need to do a lot to address it. I think one thing we have to do is make sure we're doing our best to get people healthy in the heart and the head, and then ultimately get them back to work, which is certainly critical.
Well, that is something that we've actually been discussing in Fayette County, and my colleagues who watch this may be surprised because I haven't talked to them about it yet. I've been researching it. But on the workforce shortage and the drug epidemic, there is a state-level program that pays employers to employ former felons convicted of drug crimes and other things to help get them back, reintegrate them into the workforce. Because we know that getting them a job is a big part, well, it's usually a term of their probation, for one thing, or their bond. And in the abuse and neglect case, it's usually a term to get housing and to get your children back.
Right.
So it's a huge thing, but most of our people who are in these programs do have housing, and in places like Fayette County where we have a housing shortage, we are looking at our day report center creating a program, a feeder program to train people to
Sure.
augment the food industry in our tourist towns.
Well, I mean, I think that makes sense, and there are a lot of things that we need to do because we do have a lot of great people here, and we have to take advantage of the opportunities, and there are a lot of opportunities. Unemployment rates are at an all-time low, but we badly need more people to enter into the marketplace again, and we need more people to come into our state as well because we just lost a seat in Congress because of the population decline.
Right.
We can't have that. We have to be a growing state. I've got a lot of ideas about how we can make that happen, but if you address the opioid epidemic, I think that's one key to this. And so I'm excited to work with all the folks around the state and within the counties and the cities to take advantage of some of these new tools that we'll have.
Well, you have, I marvel because for everybody's information, I worked for AG Morrisey back in 2013, and that was the first thing you said to me was, we've got to get on top of this drug epidemic. And even though these are opiate lawsuits, I always, as somebody who works with the people, we know it's more than opiates. We know it's meth.
Sure.
We know we have a much bigger problem than is qualified by that term.
Right.
But the fact that you've done this for us and the fact that you've taken the #1 ground zero state for drug problems, for drug use and abuse, to getting the #1 best settlement of its kind, I mean, the precedent is of huge importance here too, isn't it?
Well, it is, and in fact, you always have people that are critical of you, and there were people that didn't understand, or they just played politics, but we said, keep the faith, let's keep driving forward, and that's exactly what's happened. So when you're looking at some of these other trials that the political subdivisions are engaged in, we help make that happen. So you don't know everything at the beginning of a process, but you learn more and more and more, and we try to set this up in a way that West Virginia won, and by winning, that means that you're targeting the resources to those who need it most, and you're really addressing the root causes of the epidemic. And that's what our West Virginia First program does.
That's good. I think we're going to have to wrap it up and take a quick break. We'll be right back with the Capitol Report.
Stay tuned. The West Virginia Capitol Report will be right back. From under the Golden Dome in Charleston, this is the West Virginia Capitol Report.
Thanks for staying with us. We're back at the Capitol Report at the West Virginia State Capitol with our State Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey. Now, we just talked about some interesting stuff that's been going on in your office with regard to the opioid lawsuit.
Absolutely.
Now I would like to ask you about another major victory that you've had on behalf of the state of West Virginia with regard to the U.S. Supreme Court decision in favor of West Virginia and some other states and companies against the EPA.
Absolutely. So a lot of people know that we've been battling to try to protect as many of our state's energy jobs as possible over a long time. Actually, one of the first cases that I started to work on back in 2013 when I became Attorney General was trying to make sure that we're pushing back on the EPA when they had a really overzealous and incorrect perspective about what their authority was. And people may remember at the beginning of this process, they were trying to put a lot of coal miners out of work. They were trying to really not just micromanage the coal-fired power plants, but to grab power where it didn't exist. So at the very beginning, we knew that we had to fight back to protect our jobs and to give our state the time to diversify. And the more we looked into this, we decided, wait a minute, the EPA, it does have a limited ability to regulate carbon emissions, but they thought that they could go so far afield from their authority, and we said, no, you can't do that. So we filed a lawsuit against the EPA. We started back in 2014.
I wondered about that.
Yeah, so we went all the way back, and then we then filed another suit in 2015. We lost at the DC Circuit, but we were really convinced that the Supreme Court would be open-minded to our perspective, and it's for a simple reason, and you're going to hear this a little bit throughout this discussion. When there's a major question of the day, we think that that's Congress's role to make those decisions. It's not up to unelected bureaucrats. So in 2016, we went up to the High Court. We obtained the historic stay of the Obama Clean Power Plan, and that was really important because that was a bridge to get us to the Trump administration. And then obviously the Trump era, they put out their own set of rules. But it was really impactful. It saved a lot of jobs at the time. But meanwhile, time goes forward. The coal industry was hit very, very hard. We get to the end of the Trump administration. Well, the DC Circuit then ruled against us. They ruled against the Trump administration. So we once again thought that we might get a better response out of the US Supreme Court. We took the case up. And just last week, we had just an incredible victory. West Virginia v. EPA, and probably its lasting effect is going to be from a separation of powers, administrative law perspective, that we stand for the proposition that everyone needs to get a seat at the table to make the major decisions of the day. That's Congress's role and the role of the congressional representatives. That way, West Virginia, Texas, New York, California, everyone could get a seat at the table. So we really have pushed back on the administrative state, and it was a big win. I know a lot of people were trying to make this case into something it wasn't. They were trying to say, oh, they're trying to cook the earth, it's about climate change. It's not. It's actually about who gets to make the decisions of the day, the major questions of the day, as opposed to what those answers are. The answers are determined by Congress. Right. It's not determined by the unelected bureaucrats. So that's why we felt as passionately as we did. We think it's really big for West Virginia, but also it now gives us a broader tool to go after any form of federal overreach. And I think that's a great day for our country and for West Virginia.
Well, it is true, and you're right. I read a lot of the press, or some of the press anyway, more recent press about the decision, and you've got one faction of people saying this is the worst thing that's ever happened to climate change. But I think what a lot of people do miss is that it's not about climate change. This case is about the Supreme Court recently decided that against certain types of vaccine mandates, it's a similar type of thing. The federal government, without Congress acting, should not be able to do
Correct.
Those things unilaterally.
Well, that's right. It's a really simple proposition, and I would argue it's value neutral in terms of whether you're a Democrat or Republican.
Right.
It basically doesn't speak to what the substantive answer is. It speaks to the process, and we all want to comport with the legal system, the rule of law, our Constitution. And when you start allowing constitutional shortcuts to come up, that's a huge problem. So this was as much fighting against the bureaucracy, the big administrative state, the swamp, if you will, in
Right.
DC as anything else. And we had a huge victory against those bureaucrats because they've just been growing in power for so long. This, I think, helps push back quite a bit.
Well, and I felt it was interesting too when I read it, is a big part of what the court said was the government has to show the courts where in a statute they are given this authority. Like, it puts the impetus on the government
Right.
to prove that it has the authority to impose these types of rules and regulations.
Well, that's right. In fact, one of the quotes that people are fond of using, which people appreciate, is that the court says, you don't find elephants in mouse holes, right? And you can't pretend that there's this huge transformative authority to reorder the nation's power grid through a little used provision that does not do what the other side said that it does. And so I think that that makes a lot of sense. And once again, wherever you are on the issues of the day, you should always be supportive of the fact that Congress needs to make the call. Now, if you delegate it the right way in your Congress, you can get a lot of expertise and bring that to bear to address tricky problems, but you can't avoid Congress. And I think that's so important. That's why this is such a big win. And we've been focusing on this now since 2013. It's a long time coming, but I'm also hopeful it gives a little bit of additional time for a lot of the energy jobs in our state, that people know, okay, this is going to buy some time, because we know the Biden administration is targeting the elimination of those jobs, and we have to prevent that from happening.
Well, and another interesting thing, and I did read an article about it, and we discussed it briefly before we started filming, but the SEC has some plans with regard to this too, does it not?
It's wild. I mean, the SEC is trying to put broad new mandates in place for something they called ESG, Environmental Social Governance Policy. And this is actually one of the most far-reaching proposals that we've seen in a long time. And to those watching, I'll just explain it this way. Imagine if you have a really important issue, and you're dealing with climate change. What Biden is trying to do is say every federal agency now has to deal with climate change, not just the agencies with expertise. The Securities Exchange Commission has no expertise on climate change. And that's why it's just utterly bizarre. But what Biden has done is said, look, if you're HHS, if you're Department of Labor, if you're Department of Energy, if you're SEC, if you're the CFTC, they don't care. They're going to put these broad new burdens in place. We said, no, wait a minute. You can't transform a securities enforcer and make them an environmental regulator. So I'm leading a 24-state effort against this nonsense. It's all gobbledygook that these guys think they can get away with it. But the big victory that we just secured, West Virginia VPA, I think is going to give us the ability to push back, because once again, on a major question of the day, it's Congress's role to do it. The other thing I would note is when you start to have all these federal agencies just taking up the mantle of one particular item, it's very dangerous, because they want the government to be able to whisper in the ear of all the corporate boards, put new mandates in place. It's completely changing the role of the marketplace and the SEC, and we think it's important that we fight back, and I feel like we're going to be able to prevail. This matters because obviously what they want to do is take the backdoor way to regulate our energy sector, the one that we just closed when we won West Virginia VPA.
When I worked for the federal government, I was at FBI headquarters on 9/11.
Yeah.
And so after that, you could ask for counterterrorism money every year and get nothing until 9/11. And then when 9/11 happened, everybody suddenly was in counterterrorism.
Sure.
It was a similar dynamic to what you're describing now. And so I think, part of the problem is endemic and bureaucratic DC is that the only way you're going to get money for something is if it pleases an issue of the day.
Right.
So for a time there was a war on drugs, and we still kind of ironically have one, but we don't fund it now. Then we had, terrorism. And if you could find a nexus to terrorism, you could get funded.
Sure.
Then we had opioid epidemic, and now we've got climate change. So, I feel like this decision, and I don't know about you, is going to help try to divert some of that mission grab and mission creep that goes on in DC.
Well, that's certainly the hope. I mean, I think one of the values of our West Virginia VPA decision is now we have an additional tool in our toolbox to go after it when the Biden administration, or any administration for that matter, tries to change fundamentally the nature of the agency. This SEC has no expertise whatsoever with respect to climate change. And what's wild about this, they're asking for all these mandated reports that are going to be incredibly burdensome. And what are they going to do with the paper? We have no earthly idea. But for them, they don't care. They want to put so many burdens and costs on our hardworking businesses. And one of the other things you've seen with this administration is there's really been a concentrated attack on energy, and that's helped cause the price of gas to soar, and also the price you pay at the power bills has gone way, way up. So I think we have to make sure we take a step back and say, these are not things that you want to do, especially when energy prices are going through the roof.
No.
And we have to push back at that.
Well, I don't want the SEC fighting terrorism either. I mean, I feel like it's the same concept. It's totally out of its game.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And I read recently, speaking of government agencies, that you had sent a letter with regard to the baby formula shortage to the FTC.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out exactly what was going on there either.
Well, as many people know, a couple months ago, there started to be a massive shortage of infant formula that moms and kids truly rely a lot on. And I looked at that and said, well, what can we do about that, in the state AG office? And as we started to look more closely into it, we saw this incredibly burdensome set of regulations by the Food and Drug Administration. So what we decided to do is that when the FTC asked for comment about competition in this area, how to lure more food manufacturers into the space, we thought we'd weigh in, because look, I don't want any of the moms and the kids out there to be without infant formula. This is really important. So we wrote the letter, and here's what we found out. We think that the FDA has done a terrible job in terms of the regulation. They were not on top of it. when a plant was adulterated back in the day, and that was a really big deal. And also, their rules are so prescriptive in nature. It makes it very hard to encourage smaller entities to come in, or even larger entities. The amount of money that you have to have up front, that's why we have a lot of foreign manufacturers of the infant formula. We have to create a better dynamic which allows more new starts to come into the system for infant formula. That's why I wrote the letter, 14-state letter. So, you know, we go after overreach of all types, not just energy, but moms and kids count on us to weigh in on big issues like this, and we're doing that.
Well, and that EPA decision might lay the groundwork for challenging this at a higher level if you need to.
Well, we're hopeful that this EPA decision will mean a lot across the board, and but we also want to make sure we're looking always across the landscape and say, what more can we do to help the hardworking men and women and the kids of our state? And that's why I was happy to wait on the infant formula.
Well, it sounds like we need to create a baby formula manufacturing industry here in West Virginia.
Amen. Well, that would be great. And they'll know that they have a hardworking attorney general that's really opposed to regulatory overreach. That's critical.
That's right. Well, as a citizen, I really appreciate all you've done for us. I mean, you have stuck to your agenda from the day I met you, from the day you were elected.
Yeah.
You have continued to push these very important issues on our behalf, and even some none of us had foreseen, like the baby formula shortage.
Well, I think the goal was to help West Virginia reach her potential, right? And I'm a believer that West Virginia needs to be that shining state in the mountains, and this is why it's so exciting to be doing this work and then see the fruits of our labor.
Stay tuned. The West Virginia Capitol Report will be right back. From under the Golden Dome in Charleston, this is the West Virginia Capitol Report.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report with the West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, and we'll see you next time.
This has been the West Virginia Capitol Report.